Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey, not just back in time, but right into the heart of one of history's most fascinating and, frankly, a little bit gross. Civilization's ancient Egypt. Imagine, if you will, the scorching sun beating down on golden sands, the distant shimmer of the Nile, and the overwhelming scent of, well, a lot of very old, very strong incense, mixed with something a bit more, shall we say, organic. You're not just an observer tonight, you're there, feeling the heat, hearing the rustle of papyrus, and perhaps catching a whiff of something that suggests you're about to get a very close-up look at what happens when the living say goodbye to the dead. This isn't some fluffy story about pharaohs and pyramids. This is the nitty-gritty, the unvarnished reality of the truly disturbing ways ancient Egyptians dealt with death. You probably won't survive this emotionally. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, not to your cozy bedroom, but to the blinding glare of an Egyptian sun. The air is thick with the dust of centuries, and the distant sounds of a bustling ancient city reach your ears. You quickly realize you're not just visiting. You're there, an integral part of this world, and in this world. Death isn't an ending. It's merely a rather elaborate, somewhat disturbing transition. You've been born into a civilization utterly, completely obsessed with the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, life on Earth was just a fleeting moment, a prelude to the eternal existence that truly mattered. Every aspect of their culture, from their magnificent temples to their everyday rituals, revolved around preparing for this grand journey into the unknown. From the moment you could understand, you were taught about the Duat, the underworld, and the various gods who held sway over your fate after death. Osiris, the lord of the underworld, became a figure you simultaneously revered and feared. You learned about the importance of Ma'at, the cosmic order, and how living a balanced, righteous life was key to a favorable judgment in the afterlife. It's like having a cosmic credit score that determines your eternal vacation package, and you definitely want the premium package. Historians still argue whether this profound focus on the afterlife stemmed from a deep spiritual belief or was a pragmatic way to maintain social order and obedience. You see your elders preparing for their inevitable demise with an almost casual acceptance, discussing their coffins and tomb provisions as if planning a long holiday. The idea isn't to mourn the loss of life, but to ensure the deceased has everything they need for a successful transition into the field of reeds, their version of paradise. One quirky tidbit is that even pets were sometimes mummified, especially cats, which were considered sacred. Imagine having to prepare your beloved Fluffy for eternity. It's a testament to how deeply intertwined the living and the dead were in this society, and how every single soul, even the four-legged ones, deserved a shot at forever. So, as you walk through the dusty streets, you're constantly reminded that life here is just practice for the real deal, and the real deal involves a lot more than just closing your eyes and drifting off. You've just arrived in ancient Egypt, and the air is thick with the promise of eternity. But before anyone gets to the field of reeds, there's a crucial, and frankly, quite unsettling, first step in the embalming process. You're standing in a dimly lit, incense-filled chamber, and the next thing you witness is the brain extraction. Prepare yourself, because this isn't for the faint of heart. Imagine a specialized priest, an embalmer, standing over a deceased body. This person isn't just a technician. They're performing a sacred ritual, preparing the body for its journey. One of the very first things they do, and perhaps the most disturbingly ingenious, is to remove the brain. Why? Because the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence and emotion, while the brain was largely considered useless, a mere packing material that would simply putrefy and damage the mummy. It's like throwing out the box your new gadget came in because you only cared about the device itself. A bit of a dismissal for the most complex organ, wouldn't you say? The method for removing the brain was, to modern sensibilities, incredibly crude and invasive. You watch as the embalmer inserts a long, thin, hooked bronze instrument, a bit like a very specialized, very sharp knitting needle, up through the nostril. They then proceed to vigorously stir the brain, liquefying it inside the skull. Once it's a murky liquid, the body is tilted, and the liquefied brain is allowed to drain out through the nose. Sometimes, they might even use a spoon-like instrument to scoop out any remaining bits. It's a process that makes you involuntarily shudder, as if you can feel the sensation yourself. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' lack of anatomical understanding regarding the brain's function truly justified such a destructive removal process. Now, imagine the sights and sounds, the squishing noises, the dripping, and the peculiar, almost clinical detachment of the embalmer performing this task. The smell, even with the heavy incense burning, must have been distinctive. One quirky tidbit about this process is that if the nasal route proved too difficult, some embalmers would resort to making an incision at the base of the skull, which was a less common, but equally unappetizing alternative. It's enough to make you very grateful for modern neuroscience, where brains are studied, not scrambled and drained. So, as you stand there, witnessing this oddly efficient, yet utterly disturbing first step, you realize that the path to eternity in ancient Egypt is not a gentle slumber, but a rather vigorous, internal spring cleaning, with the brain unceremoniously removed, leaving an empty, echoing chamber where thoughts once resided. The embalmers turn their attention to the main cavity of the body. This is where you observe the careful, yet deeply unsettling, internal organ removal for the ancient Egyptians. Keeping the body intact was paramount for the afterlife, but the soft, internal organs were the first to decompose, threatening the entire mummification process. So, out they come. Imagine the scene: the body is laid out on a specially designed table, often made of stone or wood. The chief embalmer, a person of considerable skill and ritual knowledge, makes a long incision, usually on the left side of the abdomen. This wasn't a surgeon's delicate cut. It was a practical opening, large enough to allow access. Through this opening, almost every major internal organ is meticulously removed. The stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs, all are carefully extracted. It's a bit like taking out the stuffing from a very important, very human doll. The precision, however, is surprising. They knew their anatomy well enough to get everything out without completely mangling the body. The heart, however, is a notable exception. Remember, the Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and most importantly, the conscience. It was crucial for the judgment in the afterlife, so it was almost always left in place within the body. It's like the one precious item you absolutely can't forget when packing for an eternal trip. Historians still argue whether the removal of specific organs was based on observed decay rates or had deeper, symbolic meanings tied to specific deities. As you stand there, the air becomes heavier with a sweet, sickly odor. Even over the strong scent of frankincense and myrrh, you see the various organs, now separated from their host, laid out on trays. This wasn't a quick process. It could take several hours of careful work. One quirky tidbit sometimes: if an accidental incision was made elsewhere on the body during the process, it would be ritually sewn up and covered with a metal plate or wax, almost like a divine plaster. To ensure the body's integrity for the afterlife, this attention to detail, even for what seemed like minor mishaps, truly underscores their profound belief in preserving the body. So, as the last of the vital organs barring the heart, of course, are removed, you get a chilling sense of the body being transformed, piece by piece, from a living vessel into a meticulously prepared artifact for eternity. Now that the internal organs have been meticulously, if somewhat disturbingly, removed from the body. You might expect them to be discarded. But oh no, in ancient Egypt, every part of you was precious, especially if you wanted to enjoy a comfortable afterlife. So, the next step involves witnessing the preparation of the canopic jars. These aren't just fancy vases. They're the specialized, sacred vessels designed to house your vital organs, ensuring they're preserved and protected for eternity. Imagine these jars now, typically 4 in number, each made from alabaster, limestone, or pottery, and often beautifully decorated. What makes them truly distinctive are their lids, each sculpted into the head of one of the 4 sons of Horus, protective deities believed to guard the specific organs placed inside. You'd see Dua Mutef, the jackal-headed god, guarding the stomach, Hapi, the baboon-headed god, protecting the lungs, Imseti, the human-headed god, watching over the liver, and Keba Senuef, the falcon-headed god, safeguarding the intestines. It's like having 4 very specific, very ancient, organ-specific security guards for your insides. The removed organs weren't just tossed in. They were carefully cleaned, dried, and often wrapped in linen bandages, just like the body itself, before being placed inside their designated jar. This process was as vital as the mummification of the body itself. As the Egyptians believed, the deceased needed all their parts to be whole and functional in the afterlife. If you didn't have your liver with you, how would you process those eternal feasts? In the field of Reed's historians still argue whether the specific animal heads for each jar were chosen for their symbolic connection to the organs, or simply due to artistic tradition. As you observe, you might notice the careful, almost reverent way the embalmers handle the organs. Despite their somewhat gruesome appearance, this isn't just a job, it's a deeply spiritual act. One quirky tidbit about canopic jars while they eventually became distinct. Separate vessels, in earlier periods of mummification. The organs were sometimes simply placed back inside the body cavity, or even wrapped together in bundles and stored next to the mummy in the coffin. The evolution to separate. Highly decorated jars shows a growing sophistication in their funerary practices and their beliefs about the precise needs of the deceased in the afterlife. So, as the lids are carefully placed on these jars, sealing away the last remnants of the body's inner workings, you get a palpable sense of the incredible detail and profound belief that underpinned every step of their journey to eternity. With the brain drained and the vital organs safely tucked away in their canopic jars, the body is now ready for its most crucial transformation, the natron drying process. This wasn't some quick dip in a dehydrator. It was a lengthy, intense, and sensory overloading experience designed to completely desiccate the corpse, preventing decay and preserving it for millennia. Imagine being in a room where the air itself feels dry and stinging, laden with a peculiar, pungent odor that makes your nose twitch. The body, now essentially an empty vessel, is completely covered in natron. What is natron? You ask. It's a naturally occurring salt mixture, primarily composed of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, found in dried lake beds, particularly in the Wadi el Natron in Egypt. Think of it as a superabsorbent, ancient Egyptian version of baking soda. But on an industrial scale, the embalmers would pack the body, inside and out, with this crystalline substance. It's like being completely buried in a giant box of very powerful drying salts. The purpose of natron was simple but vital: to draw every last bit of moisture out of the body's tissues. Water is the enemy of preservation, the medium for bacteria and decomposition. By removing the water, the Egyptians effectively stopped the decay process in its tracks. The body would remain in this natron bath for approximately 40 days. Yes, 40 days. Imagine the patience and the commitment to the afterlife that this required. During this time, the body would shrivel and shrink as it lost its fluids, becoming a brittle, almost skeletal form. Historians still argue whether the precise 40-day period was based purely on practical observation of drying times or held deeper ritualistic significance. As you stand nearby, the smell is almost overwhelming. It's a combination of the dry, mineral scent of the natron itself, mingled with the faint, lingering odor of what was once a living body. The air would be thick with fine natron dust, stinging your eyes and throat. One quirky tidbit about this stage: sometimes small bags of natron would be placed inside the body cavity, acting like internal desiccant packs to ensure thorough drying from the inside out. It's a bit like adding those little silica gel packets to your new shoes, but on a much grander and grosser scale. So, as the days turn into weeks, and the body slowly transforms, you gain a new appreciation for just how thoroughly the ancient Egyptians committed to making sure their dead truly stayed dead in the physical sense, so they could thrive in the spiritual one. The 40 days of desiccation with natron are finally over. The air in the chamber is still dry, still carries that peculiar mineral tang, but the focus has shifted. What was once a full, living form is now a shriveled, brittle husk, almost skeletal in appearance. This is where you witness the eerie, almost artistic, process of body stuffing and shaping. The ancient Egyptians, ever the perfectionists, didn't want their deceased loved ones looking like scarecrows in the afterlife. They wanted them to resemble their living selves as much as possible, or at least a more robust version of their mummified selves. Imagine the embalmers, their hands now working with a surprising gentleness, beginning to restore some semblance of natural form to the shrunken corpse. They would use various materials to plump up the shriveled limbs and torso. This could include linen pads, sawdust, sand, or even straw, carefully inserted beneath the skin. Think of it like a very macabre form of ancient taxidermy, where the goal isn't to create a display piece, but to ensure the Kai and Ba aspects of the soul could recognize their physical vessel in the afterlife. It's a bit like giving a deflated balloon a careful reinflation, but with a lot more intent. Sometimes, even the facial features would be carefully addressed. Cotton or linen might be placed under the eyelids or cheeks to restore fullness, and resin plugs could be inserted into the nostrils to help maintain the nose's shape. This level of detail shows their unwavering belief that the body had to be as complete and recognizable as possible for the journey through the underworld. Historians still argue whether this aesthetic restoration was primarily for the comfort of the living or a strict ritual requirement for the deceased's spiritual recognition. As you watch, you might feel a strange mix of revulsion and fascination. The methodical nature of the work, the precise placement of the stuffing, almost transforms the gruesome into the artistic. One quirky tidbit about this process: in some instances, especially for wealthier individuals, the embalmers might even sculpt fake eyes out of linen and resin, placing them in the eye sockets to make the mummy appear more lifelike. It's enough to give you the creeps, isn't it? The idea of a lifeless body being manipulated and reshaped, not for horror, but for eternal beauty and recognition. The goal here is to create a durable, idealized vessel, ready for its final layered adornments. With the body now plumped and reshaped, no longer a shriveled husk, it's ready for the next, arguably most iconic stage: the ritual anointing and wrapping. This is where the deceased truly begins to transform into the familiar image of a mummy, meticulously covered in layers upon layers of linen bandages, each strip applied with purpose and ritual significance. Imagine the atmosphere in the embalming chamber now, thick with the scent of resins and oils, the air hushed with the solemnity of the task. First, the body is thoroughly cleaned of any remaining natron dust and then anointed with sacred oils and fragrant resins. These substances, often exotic and expensive, like frankincense, myrrh, and cedar oil, served multiple purposes. They acted as antibacterial agents, further aiding preservation, but more importantly, they carried symbolic meaning, purifying the body and preparing it for its divine journey. You can almost feel the sticky, fragrant resins being applied, a strange blend of embalming fluid and high-end perfume. It's like getting ready for the most important and longest formal event of your eternal life. Then begins the wrapping. This wasn't a casual task. It was an incredibly precise, time-consuming, and highly skilled process. Thousands of feet of linen bandages, cut into various widths, would be used. The limbs would be wrapped individually. Then the fingers and toes, followed by layers around the head and torso. Each layer was meticulously applied, often brushed with more resin to help bind the linen and create a protective shell. It's a bit like wrapping a very precious, very fragile gift. But the gift is a human body, and the wrapping needs to last for thousands of years. Historians still argue whether the complexity of the wrapping technique was primarily for practical preservation or a reflection of social status. As you watch, you might notice the incredible dexterity of the embalmers, their hands moving with practiced ease. Sometimes, passages from funerary texts or protective spells would be written directly onto the linen strips before they were applied. One quirky tidbit: the quality and quantity of the linen used varied enormously depending on the deceased's wealth. The poor might get a few rough wraps, while pharaohs could be encased in hundreds of meters of the finest, most intricately woven linen, sometimes even reused from old household textiles if supplies were short. Imagine your eternal resting place being wrapped in your grandma's old bed sheets. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? This careful layering wasn't just about appearance. It was about creating a secure, protective cocoon for the deceased, safeguarding them from harm on their perilous journey to the afterlife. The mummy is truly taking shape now, a testament to ancient Egyptian ingenuity and their profound belief in eternity, as the layers of linen meticulously encase the body, transforming it into a recognizable mummy. The process isn't just about wrapping, it's about protection. And that protection comes in the form of a myriad of amulets and charms woven into the bandages, placed directly on the body, or nestled between the layers. Imagine being wrapped in not just cloth, but in an intricate tapestry of magical safeguards, each designed to ward off evil and ensure your safe passage to the afterlife. You watch as the embalmers, or perhaps priests overseeing the process, carefully position these tiny, powerful objects. These amulets came in countless forms, each with a specific purpose. There were scarab beetles, symbolizing rebirth and regeneration; the ankh, representing life itself; the ujad eye, or Eye of Horus, offering protection and healing; and the Tayat knot, or Isis knot, associated with the protective power of the goddess Isis. It's like having a personalized, spiritual security system embedded right into your eternal outfit. They're not just pretty trinkets, they're believed to be active, magical shields. The placement of these amulets was often very precise, dictated by funerary texts and tradition. A heart scarab, for instance, was almost always placed directly over the heart, which, as you remember, was left inside the body, often inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, urging the heart not to betray the deceased during the weighing ceremony. Imagine a tiny beetle figurine being the key to your eternal salvation. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of amulets was primarily a reflection of deeply held magical beliefs or a commercial enterprise driven by the embalming industry. As the wrapping continues, you see these small, often beautifully crafted objects disappear beneath the linen. Each one represents a prayer, a hope, a desperate plea for safety in the perilous journey through the underworld. One quirky tidbit: some mummies have been found with literally hundreds of these amulets, layered throughout the bandages. It's like a medieval warrior putting on every single piece of good luck jewelry they own before a battle, multiplied by 1,000, and designed to last for millennia. The sheer quantity sometimes found suggests that more was definitely considered better when it came to securing a blessed afterlife. So, as the last strips of linen cover the final charm, you realize that this mummy isn't just a preserved body. It's a fortress of belief, shielded by ancient magic against the unseen dangers of the Duat. The mummy is now fully wrapped, a linen-bound vessel teeming with protective amulets. But the ancient Egyptians weren't content with just preserving the body. They wanted to ensure the deceased could interact with the afterlife, to see, hear, speak, and eat in the eternal realm. This is where you encounter one of the most bizarre and profoundly symbolic rituals: the opening of the mouth. Imagine the mummy, now carefully placed upright, perhaps leaned against a wall or supported by assistants, facing a priest. This isn't just any priest. This is a specially designated individual, often wearing a panther skin over his robes, signifying his sacred role. In his hand, he holds a peculiar, adze-like instrument, often made of iron or obsidian, sometimes even shaped like the head of a ram or a serpent. It's like a dentist's tool, but for souls, and with a much more mystical purpose. The ritual itself involves the priest touching various parts of the mummy's face, the mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, with this instrument, as well as other ritualistic objects like a censer for incense and containers for sacred water and oils. Each touch is accompanied by specific incantations and prayers, recited from ancient texts. The purpose to symbolically reactivate the senses and bodily functions of the deceased. The Egyptians believed that without this ritual, the mummy would be unable to breathe, speak, eat, or see in the afterlife, essentially condemning the Ka and Ba to a silent, inert existence. It's a bit like needing to hit the on switch for your eternal consciousness. Historians still argue whether the ritual was a literal belief in reanimating the body or a purely symbolic act for spiritual transformation. As you stand there, observing this deeply unsettling yet fascinating ceremony, the air fills with the drone of the priest's chants and the sweet scent of burning incense. It's a moment charged with spiritual energy, a desperate plea to the gods to grant the deceased full faculties in the next world. One quirky tidbit about this ritual: sometimes real food and drink offerings were presented to the mummy during the ceremony, and even a leg of a freshly slaughtered calf might be ritually touched to the mummy's mouth, symbolizing nourishment for the afterlife. Imagine a priest offering a beef dinner to a wrapped corpse. It underscores the intensely practical and literal nature of their beliefs regarding the needs of the dead, with the final touch of the adze to the mummy's mouth. The ritual concludes, and the deceased is deemed ready, at least physically and spiritually, to embark on the next phase of their eternal journey. The opening of the mouth ceremony is complete, the mummy now theoretically capable of experiencing the afterlife. But before the grand journey to the duat can truly begin, you need a proper vehicle, a protected sanctuary for your eternal slumber. This brings us to the layers of coffins and sarcophagi, intricately decorated, confining burial containers designed to house and safeguard the mummy for eternity. Imagine being prepared for a very, very long sleep, and your bed is actually a series of increasingly elaborate, often gilded, boxes. You watch as the mummy, now a perfectly wrapped and ritually activated vessel, is carefully placed into the innermost coffin. This first coffin, often anthropoid, human-shaped and made of wood, would be painted with the deceased's likeness, complete with an idealized face and elaborate funerary regalia. It's like a very personalized, ancient sleeping bag, but one that's also your portrait. The details are astonishing: painted eyes that seem to gaze into eternity, carefully rendered wigs, and intricate collars. This inner coffin is then placed inside a second, larger coffin, also often anthropoid, and frequently even more richly decorated. Wealthier individuals, especially pharaohs and high-ranking nobles, might have as many as 3 or even 4 layers of coffins, each nesting perfectly within the last. This wasn't just for show. Each layer provided additional protection for the fragile mummy within, acting as a series of defensive shells against both physical damage and spiritual harm. It's a bit like a set of Russian nesting dolls, but with a much more somber and permanent purpose. Historians still argue whether the increasing number of coffins over time was due to a heightened fear of tomb robbers or a growing emphasis on demonstrating wealth and status in death. Finally, the entire nested set of coffins would be placed inside a massive, rectangular stone sarcophagus. These sarcophagi, often carved from granite, basalt, or quartzite, were incredibly heavy and robust, designed to be virtually impenetrable. They too would be inscribed with hieroglyphs, protective spells, and scenes from the Book of the Dead, further ensuring the deceased's safe passage. Imagine the sheer effort required to quarry, transport, carve, and then seal these enormous stone boxes. One quirky tidbit about sarcophagi, some early examples, particularly for pharaohs, were designed to resemble the royal palace, symbolically providing a secure, eternal home for the ruler's spirit. So, as the heavy lid of the final sarcophagus is slowly lowered and sealed, you realize that your eternal rest begins not in a soft bed, but within layers of wood and stone, a perfectly designed cocoon against the ravages of time and the ambitions of the living. The heavy lid of the sarcophagus has been sealed, enclosing the mummy in its layers of protection. You might imagine that now. After all that meticulous embalming and wrapping, the deceased is finally alone, resting peacefully in eternal solitude. But you would be quite wrong. Now you're transported into the heart of an Egyptian burial chamber, and you immediately realize that tombs are crowded afterlives. Your eternal resting place is far from solitary. It's a bustling, albeit silent, extension of the deceased's earthly life, meticulously packed with goods, provisions, and even other beings. Imagine stepping into a tomb, not as an empty cavern, but as a densely furnished apartment designed for the afterlife. Every conceivable item the deceased might need for eternity is there, stacked from floor to ceiling. There are vast quantities of food-dried meats, loaves of bread, fruits, and jars of wine and beer, all carefully prepared and often symbolically represented. After all, you wouldn't want to go hungry in the field of reeds, would you? It's like the ultimate picnic basket, packed for a journey that lasts forever. Beyond food, there are personal possessions, furniture, jewelry, clothing, tools, chariots, even board games like Senet, all designed to make the eternal existence as comfortable and enjoyable as possible for a pharaoh or a wealthy noble. This could mean an entire treasury of gold, precious stones, and exquisite craftsmanship. You might even find tiny model boats, ensuring safe passage across the mythical waterways of the underworld. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of grave goods was primarily an act of genuine devotion or a competitive display of wealth and power among the elite. And then there are the figures of the deceased's servants. Not real people, thankfully, but shabti figures, small, mummiform figurines, often numbering in the hundreds, sometimes even thousands. These were magical servants, enchanted to come to life in the afterlife and perform any manual labor the deceased might be commanded to do. Imagine having an entire army of miniature, magical robots to handle all your chores for eternity. What a life-one quirky tidbit about Shabti. Some tombs even contained overseers among the Shabti figures, designed to keep the worker Shabtis in line, just in case they got lazy in the afterlife. It's enough to make you chuckle. Even in this solemn setting, eternal bureaucracy. Indeed so. As you gaze upon this packed subterranean apartment, you realize that for the ancient Egyptians, death was not about separation, but about creating a fully furnished, bustling eternal home, ready for a very busy afterlife. You've seen the crowded tombs, packed with provisions and Shabti servants, all designed for a comfortable eternity. But even with walls of stone and layers of protective spells, there was one pervasive, terrifying threat that constantly loomed over the eternal rest of the deceased, the tomb robbery threat. Imagine spending your entire life, and then your entire death, trying to secure your afterlife, only for some ancient rapscallion with a pickaxe to come along and ruin everything. The incredible wealth buried with the deceased, especially pharaohs and high-ranking officials, was an irresistible temptation for looters. Despite elaborate anti-theft measures, hidden entrances, false walls, booby traps, though these were often more symbolic than lethal. Sadly. For the tomb robbers, tombs were frequently plundered, sometimes within years, or even months, of being sealed. It's like building the most impenetrable vault known to mankind, only to find someone just walks in the back door with a crowbar. The consequences of tomb robbery were horrifying to the ancient Egyptians. Not only did it mean the loss of valuable treasures, but far worse. It meant the desecration of the deceased's body and tomb, For the ka and ba aspects of the soul, a damaged mummy or a disturbed resting place could prevent them from returning to the body, effectively condemning the deceased to a restless, unfulfilled eternity, stuck between worlds. Imagine being trapped in limbo because some greedy grave robber wanted your gold necklace. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of tomb robbery led to more secretive burial practices or simply a resigned acceptance of the inevitable. You might see evidence of desperate attempts to deter robbers' curses inscribed on tomb walls warning of divine retribution for those who dared to disturb the dead. Yet, these threats rarely worked. The allure of immense riches was simply too strong. One quirky tidbit: some pharaohs, in an attempt to protect their mummies, were later moved multiple times to secret caches, like the famous Deir el-Bahari cache, where over 50 royal mummies were found together, reburied by priests trying to safeguard them from persistent looting. It's like playing a centuries-long game of hide-and-seek with your own deceased ancestors. So, even in death, the ancient Egyptians couldn't truly escape the concerns of the living, constantly battling against the very human desire for gold and the disturbing implications of a disturbed afterlife. The peace you hoped for in eternity was constantly under threat. Despite the ever-present threat of tomb robbers, the goal of all that elaborate mummification and crowded tomb provisioning was to enable the ultimate journey, the journey to the underworld, known to the Egyptians as the Duat. This wasn't a leisurely cruise, it was a perilous, uncertain voyage fraught with terrifying obstacles and demanding divine judgments. Imagine yourself, not as a tourist, but as a very vulnerable soul, about to embark on the most important and dangerous trip of your entire existence. Once your burial rituals were complete and your tomb sealed, your personality soul, often depicted as a human-headed bird, would emerge from your mummy, ready to navigate the vast, dark, and often horrifying landscape of the Duat. This journey was meticulously mapped out in funerary texts like the Book of the Dead, which acted as a travel guide and cheat sheet for the deceased. You'd need to know the names of various gods, demons, and gatekeepers, recite specific spells, and navigate treacherous lakes of fire or rivers filled with monstrous creatures. It's like a cosmic escape room, but if you fail a puzzle, you're eternally devoured. The Duat was believed to be a chaotic realm, filled with both benevolent deities and monstrous entities waiting to thwart your progress or consume your soul. You would encounter guardian demons at various gates, each requiring a specific password or spell to pass. Imagine having to remember 1,000 different passwords just to get to your final destination. Historians still argue whether the terrifying imagery of the Duat was meant to inspire fear and obedience among the living, or served as a profound psychological representation of overcoming inner demons. Your journey would involve meeting a variety of gods, some helpful, others potentially hostile. You'd need to plead your case, demonstrate your knowledge of sacred texts, and prove your worthiness. One quirky tidbit about this journey there were specific spells in the Book of the Dead designed to prevent your head from being chopped off, or your soul from being eaten by various creatures. It's like having "don't get decapitated" as a top priority on your eternal packing list. So, as you spiritually float through this dark, dangerous realm, dodging shadowy figures and trying to remember ancient incantations, you quickly realize that earning your eternal paradise is a full-time, terrifying job. And there are no second chances if you forget a crucial spell. The ultimate destination, the Field of Reeds, seems incredibly distant through all this peril. You've bravely navigated the treacherous paths of the Duat, skillfully dodging demonic creatures and reciting countless spells. Now, at the culmination of your perilous journey, you face the most critical moment of your entire eternal existence, the weighing of the heart. This is the ultimate judgment, the test that determines whether all that mummification, all those tomb provisions, and all your hard work in the underworld were worth it. You stand before Osiris, the Lord of the underworld, in the Hall of Two Truths, and your heart's purity will decide your ultimate fate. Imagine the scene: you are in a vast hall, dimly lit, with the powerful figure of Osiris seated on a throne, surrounded by 42 divine judges, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, often stands by, ready to perform his sacred duty. And at the center of it all is a colossal set of scales. On one pan, there is a single, significant item, your heart, the very organ that was left inside your mummified body. On the other pan rests the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. It's like the ultimate lie detector test, but with eternal consequences. Your task is to recite the negative confession, declaring your innocence from a long list of sins. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied, and so on. Through 42 specific transgressions, as you speak, your heart is weighed against the feather. The belief was that if you had lived a life of truth and justice, your heart would be light, balancing perfectly with the feather. If your heart was heavy with sin, it would tip the scales. Historians still argue whether the concept of the weighing of the heart primarily promoted ethical behavior in life or simply provided a framework for a comforting narrative of divine judgment. The stakes couldn't be higher. If your heart balanced with Ma'at, you were declared true of voice and granted eternal bliss in the field of reeds. But if your heart was heavier than the feather, if your sins outweighed your virtue, then a monstrous creature awaited. You'd see Amit, the devourer of the dead, a terrifying beast with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, poised to instantly consume your unworthy heart. Imagine the absolute terror of seeing this creature, knowing it's literally waiting to gobble up your soul and condemn you to oblivion. A second death. An eternal non-existence. One quirky tidbit: some Egyptians would include spells in their coffins designed to prevent their hearts from betraying them during this weighing, almost like a desperate spiritual cheat code. So, as you hold your breath, watching the scales, you realize this moment is everything. Your entire past life and your entire future afterlife hinge on the delicate balance of a feather. You've passed the ultimate test. Your heart perfectly balanced against the feather of Ma'at. Congratulations. You are now true of voice, worthy of the eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds. This is it. The moment you've been working towards throughout your entire life and arduous afterlife journey. You have achieved eternal existence. But, as with all things in ancient Egypt, there's a catch, and a rather disturbing awareness of its limitations. Imagine yourself stepping into the Field of Reeds, a verdant landscape of lush fields, abundant harvests, and flowing waterways. It's depicted as an idealized version of the Nile Valley, where food is plentiful, work is effortless thanks to your Shabdi servants. Remember them. And you are reunited with your beloved family and friends who also proved worthy. The sun always shines, the air is always pleasant, and every day is a joyous continuation of the best moments of your earthly life. It sounds utterly blissful, doesn't it? The ultimate reward for a life well lived and a judgment well passed. However, this eternal existence isn't quite the limitless freedom you might imagine. You are, in a sense, eternally bound to this perfect agricultural paradise, while you are free from earthly suffering and the fear of death. You are still operating within the defined parameters of this divine realm. There's no exploring other cosmic dimensions, no evolving beyond your perfected self. You are simply eternally farming and feasting in a perfectly pleasant, yet unchanging, landscape. It's like being stuck in the most beautiful, endless vacation resort, but it's the only resort, and you can never check out. Historians still argue whether this vision of eternity was meant to be truly fulfilling or reflected a deeper cultural comfort with unchanging order. And then there's the lingering awareness of your physical vessel back on Earth. While your Ba and Ka are enjoying paradise, they are still inextricably linked to your preserved mummy. If, despite all the precautions, your tomb was ever fully desecrated, your mummy destroyed, or even just utterly forgotten by the living, your eternal existence could be jeopardized. The connection was vital. The physical body acted as an anchor for the soul. One quirky tidbit about this lingering physical connection: sometimes, if a mummy was damaged, priests would perform rituals to symbolically repair the body. even if the actual physical damage couldn't be undone, in the belief that this would help the deceased's soul in the afterlife. It's a bit like desperately trying to fix a broken satellite dish to keep your eternal Netflix streaming. So, while you bask in the eternal sunshine of the field of reeds, there's always that tiny, nagging thought in the back of your newly reactivated mind. Is my body still safe back home? A rather disturbing limitation for what should be perfect bliss. Wouldn't you agree? And with that, we gently draw the curtains on our journey through the fascinating, often disturbing, ways ancient Egyptians dealt with death. As the last echoes of their beliefs and rituals fade, you can almost feel the weight of their profound obsession with eternity lift from your own shoulders. Take a deep breath, letting go of the ancient dust, the scent of natron, and the complex journey through the duat. That world, so focused on what came next, is now far behind us. Allow your mind to drift, to soften, as you imagine the quiet comfort of your own bed, the familiar sounds of your own home, the elaborate preparations, the terrifying judgments, the eternal farming. These are but stories whispered in the night. Let them dissolve, like mist at dawn. There's no weighing of the heart here, no demons to avoid, only the peaceful quiet of your own space. Feel the gentle pull of sleep, a soft current guiding you toward rest. May your dreams be filled with peace, far removed from the disturbing realities of ancient Egyptian death. End of script. Sweet dreams.